Big beverage and food companies, in the meantime, are now in the climate change crosshairs because while they make a lot of green, a new report finds out they aren't necessarily green for the environment. According to Oxfam America, companies like General Mills, Kellogg, and Pepsi, to name a few, there's a look at more of them, emit large amounts of greenhouse gas. And when totaled together, the companies, in the opinion of this report, are considered to be main culprits of climate change. So let's bring in Raymond Offenheiser. He's president of Oxfam America, and Joseph Bast, who's CEO of the Heartland Institute, which takes issue with these findings. So welcome to you both. Raymond, first of all, how much are you putting on these specific companies for climate change as you see it, and what does that imply for the amount of money or the amount of changes that they need to make?
Well, thanks, Kelly. Delighted to be with you today. Our report basically is challenging the 10 largest food and beverage companies to step off the sidelines and to get active on climate change in a real way. I think, as you just pointed out, 25% of carbon emissions globally can be attributed actually to agricultural supply chains, which actually implies that the food and beverage companies have an enormous responsibility to be active in the solution. Our belief is actually that as food production companies, they are part of the problem in their carbon emissions, but we also believe that they're actually part of the solution. And if they and the thing I think that's really important, I think, for your listeners to recognize is that at this point in time, most of the companies recognize that their supply chains are at risk. Their investors believe that to be the case, and they've got an enormous responsibility, I think, both to communities throughout the world as well as investors to take action.
Joseph, you feel differently?
Yes, I do. Yeah, I think I've looked at the Oxfam study, and what I see is, I think, an over-reliance on the IPCC, which is the United Nations Agency on Global Warming. I don't think that the evidence is anywhere near as clear that we have things to worry about on climate. The food industry in particular is doing a terrific job of feeding a growing world population, and it's doing that using fossil fuels. Without fossil fuels, there's no way we could feed a growing worldwide
Joseph, are you
population.
taking issue with the presumption of climate change, or are you taking issue with the role of the food companies in that?
Oh, well, I think one is a subset of the other. So if we don't have a global warming crisis, why are we asking food companies, which are part of the solution, not part of the problem, to reduce their carbon footprint?
Sarah?
I'm kind of surprised because, people who are familiar with the hunger problem in agriculture understand that carbon dioxide is a food fertilizer. So the more we produce carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, the more it encourages plant growth and crop harvest. 16% of the increase in food production in the 20th century was due to carbon dioxide levels rising in the atmosphere.
Sarah,
so why punish an industry for this?
Raymond, do you want to just quickly respond to that?
Yeah, well, I think Joe clearly represents a minority view. We stand with the 1,500 or so climate scientists from around the world who've really made the case that carbon dioxide is actually an important contributor to climate change, and that we've got to begin to take action on that, and it's humanly induced. And so, and I think maybe it's also important to indicate that as an international organization, we're working around the world on the ground, dealing with poor communities that are actually living the experience of climate change today. In sub-Saharan Africa today, drought cycles have been reduced.
Not to cut in, but I'm curious as to why you pinpointed the specific companies of Kellogg and General Mills, and whether you have any examples of companies that are actually doing it right or that get it.
Well, I think all of these companies in our overview, which are actually the 10 biggest food and beverage companies, are ones that have actually recognized the climate problem. They recognize that it has its roots in carbon. They recognize that they need to take action, and they all are doing something. I guess our challenge to the companies is that that 50% or more of their carbon emissions come from their agricultural supply chains, and that's actually the area that they're not disclosing in terms of impact. So what we're challenging them to do is actually to fully disclose the carbon emissions in their agricultural supply chains, which are actually the biggest part of the contribution, and actually set targets for reducing those proportional to their potential impact.
What do you think as an investor? in some of these affected companies, listed companies? Here are some of the biggest companies in America.
I think some of these companies they're taking the right steps. Could they do more? Certainly. But at the same time, they have an obligation to focus on profitability and balancing that near-term versus long-term kind of strategy. So I don't think that they're perfect. I think there's certainly areas like in efficiencies, processing efficiencies that they can focus on. Also kind of using more solar lighting, efficiency lighting. I mean, we talk to the HVAC companies all the time, and that is definitely certainly a trend that's starting to happen that these companies are going after. But you know, they have an obligation also to focus on shareholder value and being profitable.
Joe, we got to go, but do you think that focus that Stephanie's talking about is all mistaken or mislaid?
I think it's mistaken and unnecessary. I think it hurts the profitability of a company to do unnecessary reductions in its carbon dioxide emissions. There's no science that says that this is necessary. The food industry is doing a terrific job. We owe them a huge debt of gratitude, and a lot of that is because of their carbon emissions.
Yeah, but some of these companies themselves have said that this is something that they think is an issue and one that they want to work on.
You know, for PR, we've learned, for PR reasons, every company wants to paint itself green. They're going to say that they're doing everything they can to reduce their carbon footprint. That doesn't mean it's good science, and it doesn't mean that it's good for investors. I think a lot of money is being wasted by a lot of companies trying to fight this goblin called global warming, when in fact we know now the science is definitely out on this. It's not a crisis.
Look, Raymond, Joe, I know you guys fundamentally disagree on this. There are some big companies in the middle. We'll have to leave it there for now. Thank you both.
Agreed.
Congress